It's time. Welcome to AI Mistakes. Got some great content tonight. We have some really amazing things that have been happening over at OpenAI, and they've made some big announcements. And it turns out we've got quite a few more announcements to go. But today, let's talk about what they just announced yesterday, the ChatGPT Pro subscription. Now, some of you might be familiar with the ChatGPT Plus subscription that's only $20 a month, but this is something altogether very different and new. And the question that we're asking today is this a deal? Is this a steal or a dud? What exactly is going on here? I think we need to understand where we are because they made this fascinating introduction. And I really want to cover this with you. I want to dive into what we can talk about for introducing Chat GPT Pro. So here's what they did. And they've been doing this 12 days of releases. They're calling it Shipmas. Okay, I guess it's maybe a little bit catchy, but $200 plan is your first announcement. I don't know. Now, if you follow the traditional Christmas litany of the 12 days of Christmas, things kind of get progressively better throughout the journey, right? So, does this mean that this is the least great part of the announcement they're going to release? Well, it could be. Why are they doing this? There's a lot of questions that many people are asking. Of course, they're bragging about their benchmarks and their performance, and there's all kinds of numbers to talk about in terms of what they've released. But I really want to get into the details here. Let's talk about this a little bit more because this has really got me asking why OpenAI. I want to understand, like, what's the plan here? What's the value? Why are we doing this? So let's start with who is actually even using OpenAI right now? Who is working on this? Well, it turns out that actually ChatGPT is pretty much breaking some really big barriers right now. They've made some incredible progress. ChatGPT topped 3 billion visits. 3 billion. That's a lot. In fact, it's more than Amazon.com. So we're not talking about some small numbers here. They're getting a lot of visits. Now, I'm sure a lot of this is attributable to their growth in free services and capabilities. They are, in fact, the most popular and most widely known AI service. In fact, if you ask a person on the street about generative AI and you ask them about ChatGPT, they're more likely to know what ChatGPT is than they are generative AI. Isn't that interesting? It's known by its application. Well, we also call it Amazon.com. And of course, they own a lot more than Amazon.com, especially if you've been in the IT space like me. You know them more for AWS than you do for Amazon.com because they run a majority of the internet. So ChatGPT is a force to be reckoned with, and they've got 300 million individual users. And that continues to go up. So they are absolutely growing. And I think the daily message value is also one to notice. More than 1 billion messages a day. I mean, look, that's a pretty incredible volume to speak of, regardless of how it's being generated. Every one of those has got to be sent and received, and ostensibly somebody's actually doing something with those messages. Now, this is just ChatGPT. We haven't broken out the API utilization. So that is a notable point to remember. But I think it's important for us to consider, look, it is a popular service. And so at some point, they have to figure out how are they going to lay out the different services. And this is one of the things that they're doing to differentiate them. And this is where we have to begin talking about things like the models. Now, there are a lot of people that are studying AI and focusing on the capabilities and trying to understand what does all this mean? What is the value? And so what I want to share with you first is one of the folks that I get a lot of information from is Alan Thompson. He runs lifearchitect.ai. He's got some really great publications. He's got a paid subscription if you're into such things. But he's collected a lot of details about the models. And so I'm going to spend the next few minutes just kind of talking about where we are with the models, because the other big thing that happened parallel to this announcement of the OpenAI Pro subscription for $200 a month is the O1 model is complete. It is no longer a preview. It is fully released. In fact, that really just happened, and they were training this model for quite some time, but not as long as you might think. I mean, we are talking about months, right, from February to June, and of course, these are estimates, but this is as good as we're going to get in terms of the numbers. But you can kind of compare where we are from a training investment standpoint to all of the other models that are out there, and that's an important point to consider. So if we look deeply in detail at this grid, we've got GPT-3, which basically was somewhere in the order of 130 teraflops per second. And those numbers have continued to grow up progressively. Now, this is the model that is beyond GPT-4. And, depending on who you ask, as Alan will tell you, this is kind of technically GPT-5, but they didn't want to call it that. That's kind of where we are, honestly. And there's still some models here that we don't know about. We know that there's some release details with Gemini 2, and of course, X.AI is coming along with Grok. They're making some really great strides there. So this is some interesting bit of detail, but we're not done because Alan's got a lot of great information to share. I love some of his visuals. I can't possibly compete with the analysis that he's got here, so I'm just going to show it to you. When you look at the GPQA scores, and again, this is a specific scoring mechanism that was built, and we've got dozens upon dozens of models that have been ranked in here. You can begin to see how they compare to one another on this grid. And the important thing to understand here also is that we're at a point where we are touching the test ceilings. And the problem with a benchmark is that it does have a defined interval. And if you hit either side of the interval, you lose your ability to fully understand that. If you go back to the grade school analogy, right? Well, if you got a 0, it means you weren't able to answer any of the questions. If you got 100, you were able to answer all of them. But how much did you know? Because you hit 100 and there wasn't any scoring beyond 100. That's the situation that we face with these model benchmarks. But there's more detail here that Alan has to share, and this is his chart kind of rendered in a different way to show you the size of the models in addition to that GPQA score. And what we see is that O1 is a very large model, right? And it is scoring the best of the very large models, but it's also not the absolute largest. So it's kind of interesting to see how these rank. Now, what we notice here also is that there are a lot of models available that are widely known, and that's part of the greatness of this chart, is being able to understand where each of these kind of fit on the continuum. But look, if you've been using AI-based applications, you probably also understand that not all AI is the same. If you're using Llama 2 in that AI application, you're using AI inside of the application, and the application developers, that may even be you, are perfectly right to say AI powered, right? But I don't think that a GPT 3.5 based AI tool is really even in competition with a GPT-4 Turbo, or certainly not an O1. But that's when we get into some more details a little bit later in the chat tonight, because it's not just about how smart the model is, but in terms of smartness, right now, O1 is the top dog. And we see here that LLMs are outperforming even human experts. And that's a pretty significant detail. Now, many of you might have experienced the AI mistakes that are out there in the great wide world. Look, we know that the situation in interrogating and working with these AI models is not always perfect, okay? And the reality is that when you work with humans, they're also not always perfect. we make mistakes. That's part of the reason why I started AI Mistakes, because we make mistakes. AI makes mistakes. Look, even the absolute best model, while it is, again, touching the top of that test ceiling, is not perfect. I don't think we're ever going to see a fully perfect model. There's always going to be something that's missing for one reason or another. But I also think that that's part of the spice of life. You know, we have to navigate our way through this world in a lot of different ways. And that's exactly what these AI models are doing now. And I think that's an important part to consider, because now they are navigating the world with us. In fact, what that really means is that as you and I are experiencing the great wide world, we are using these tools more and more often. And this is where we have to really come to grips with, not every model is great at everything. And this is a great case in point. I really have to give OpenAI credit for releasing all of the details in a paper. Now, this was released a few months ago. In fact, let me go back to the very top of this document here just quickly. And oh, look at that, September of 2024. And the diagram that we're talking about here that I want to cover is that OpenAI is being pretty straightforward about how they're able to do this. Let me go back to my spot here instead of making you dizzy with my scrolling. The the agent performance, I think, is an interesting detail for us to consider, because basically what OpenAI is showing us with this detail is that O1 is not the best at agent performance. And I think that's an important consideration. Not all models are actually best for all things. What does that really mean? I think it means that we are going to be connecting a variety of different models for tasks, especially as we move into the agentic capabilities. You're not going to want to use O1 to run all of your agents. It's just a fact. In fact, in large organizations, we don't have the same class of personality or type of person that's running all parts of the organization. We use different skills in different places, and we apply them in very different ways. So it's very important to consider exactly what it is that you are doing and make that a part of how you're making your decisions. Now, when it comes down to what we're talking about today, the OpenAI ChatGPT Pro subscription, I think it's now time for us to start asking, well, if they're not good at absolutely everything, if it doesn't do absolutely everything, why does anyone even want this? And that's when we need to get into the details of, what people have been experimenting with and how they've been using the capabilities of ChatGPT and the models that are behind it at large. So the first one I want to talk about is the academic excellence that's been demonstrated by the models that are presented here. The first is, look, these are scoring extremely well on mathematics, and even competitive programming. I had a friend send me a message on X earlier last night, and he was pointing out, his question to me was, "Hey, what PhDs are these models actually going to be better at?" Because he was reading an article that was showing some commentary about how they were outperforming PhDs. Well, we have some very distinct PhD categories that we have very clearly surpassed them. But honestly, I don't see any reason why these models don't continue to improve, and they'll eventually pass all of the PhD level accuracy benchmarks, because those are benchmarks we have. Those are documents and data that we have across the board to train the models on. And so there's really no reason for that improvement of performance to not continue. Now, from a programming standpoint, look, that's a domain that I live in. Um, there's a lot of code to manage, and it's really interesting to watch people talk about AI on social media, because I'm connected to and follow a lot of the folks that I see really pushing the envelope and running deep experiments, trying things that they don't expect to work. But oftentimes they are increasingly surprised with what these models are capable of doing. Now, we could get into an argument about which model is the best at writing programming and code right now. I do think that there are a lot of options available. I think that's actually really good for you and I because it means that you're able to do more and more without having to know all of the insights. And I think that's also one of the things that's materializing here. When you are an expert at writing code, when you see a problem when it's not doing it just perfectly, you immediately identify that and you kind of feel like you want to stop using it. And what I have seen in AI is often people that are unfamiliar with a topic are much more willing to go far in experimenting and trying new things with the AI model. And I think that's also a thing that we need to be really aware of. The more expert you are in a category, the more reticent you're likely to be in trying new things with these tools. And that's why, again, I want to emphasize AI mistakes is about going before you're ready on all levels, right? Trying out these tools and capabilities on things you don't think they're good at, just so you can experiment and see what the results are. And as you do that, you become more familiar with them. And then when they begin to outperform us, like competitive programming, well, you have it on your side instead of being left behind. I think that's really the essence of what we're seeing in some of these details today. And as I continue running through the why does any of this matter, you know, looking specifically at the American Invitational Mathematics exam, he was able to solve 13 out of 15. And I got to be honest with you guys. Look, I'm a programmer, but math is not my favorite subject. It's pretty likely. I mean, I haven't seen the questions, but I'm highly confident that 13 out of the 15 questions I would not be able to answer, much less get right. So we also have to be realistic about the incredible capabilities that these models have. Like these scores and numbers are frankly outrageous. That it is this successful. And you see here, GPT 4.0 versus O1, you've got a change delta of over 60% better. So that is a really strong improvement. And look, no matter what you call the model, I think it is really important for us to understand that it is getting better. So is it hitting a wall? Well, we haven't seen what the next model really looks like, but we also know that OpenAI is continuing to drive forward and really push the envelope of what's possible. So where do you start applying these capabilities? You know, what can you really do with it? And you know, I'm not going to profess to understand absolutely every bit of the applications, but look, doing things with genes can be incredibly complicated. Doing complex economic analysis and quantum physics, being able to set these problems in front of the large language model just to see what kind of answers they give is incredibly valuable because you're able to get feedback as you are studying things. You know, having an extra pair of eyes just to look at the data and break it down, I think is something that is not to be excluded. I think the real question is, you know, do you need O1 for those kinds of capabilities? Does that really matter? Uh, I don't know. I think there is some real value there, and we're gonna have to dig into that a little bit more. But before I do that, one more tidbit. What's interesting here is that O1 is better at reducing hallucinations. It's also better at resisting jailbreaks. So they're actually getting better at protecting the system, and it's getting better at understanding unambiguous questions. So, what do I get for my $200? That's really the next question because we already know it can process language, but it's really good at it and it's more persuasive, which I think is an important clue because there's a lot of things you can do with these models, and it's more than just language that it's capable of. So for my $200, we get unlimited access to their most powerful reasoning model. What does that mean? It means it spends more time thinking on your prompts. Does that always immediately result in better outputs? Well, it certainly can. And we've seen that as we've improved the inferencing time, the results are actually getting better. Now, it's not clear if OpenAI is going to share what it's thinking about during that time. If you shell over the $200 a month versus the $20 a month. They certainly don't show it to me at the plus queue, but that's okay. Look, there's a lot of things to learn, and if you want to start to understand what's happening in the model thinking, there's actually some open source models out there that you could begin playing with that show more of those details. And I think we're going to continue to gravitate toward more compute time, but it's still very expensive. And that is a big part of what's driving the increased price of the Pro subscription. But it's not just that. There's actually a Pro level model. So they've done something a little bit special with Pro. Now, they have not shared any details of what exactly the Pro model is. I imagine that will come at some point. We'll get a better understanding of that. I already had an opportunity to watch a video earlier tonight of some folks playing around with comparing the two models, Pro and Plus, side by side. And it was some interesting results that were coming out of that. So that is not to be entirely discounted. Then we've got the preview access to GPT-5. Basically, we don't know what they're going to release next, but if you're paying $200 a month, by golly, they're going to give you the chance to play with it first. Now, I think the more important detail here are these 3 bullet points at the end. It's going to have fewer errors. This newer model is better at understanding what it is that you want and giving you what you've asked for and not making errors. And when we talk about programming, that's a really important consideration. Then when we talk about the performance, I mean, look, that's super critical. If you're doing complex things like doing law analysis, yeah, that's a really important thing to consider. Now, from a cost benefit analysis standpoint, it's 10 times more expensive. So I think for you and I to turn it on, we have to get 10 times the value out of it. Now, if you're doing any sort of application development, you can't use ChatGPT behind your app. So while the API pricing is higher, and it is substantially expensive, it's also totally not useful for plugging into and using in an application. So you spend that $200, and if you want to be able to build something for someone else, none of that is useful for sharing or distributing those capabilities. And the compute, look, there's no denying it. Okay, the compute is incredibly expensive. Honestly, I have no idea how OpenAI continues to spend what they do on both the model development and sending out those responses from the in situation compute, right? When we're doing that inferencing, that too isn't free. I mean, there is substantial compute that's required to drive those capabilities. So I think that is really important for us to weigh here. And ultimately, here's what I want you to know from a value assessment standpoint. Who's this really intended for? Well, the best is going to be your professional developer crowd. Professional developers and researchers are really the ones that are going to get the most value out of this. Look, if you are developing code all day long, I think this might be a good idea for you, right? I mean, if you can develop that code just a little bit faster, you and I both know that most programmers are making enough money to handle paying for a $200 a month subscription. Now, again, is that the right idea? Yeah, your mileage may vary, but I don't know. I think I'd hire ChatGPT Pro before I'd hire another developer, honestly. Because if I'm going to hire another developer, I'm going to spend at least $200 in a month. So that is a factor to consider. And if you're a data scientist, the same goes, right? You can work on more complicated problems because you have it at your side to help you understand what to do. And look, there are those organizations out there that just want the absolute best, and they'll pay any price to have the absolute best that's out there. But look, for those of us that are out there using this on a casual basis, and honestly, lately, that's been more the case with me. I do a lot of leisure playing around with it, and I will occasionally hit the bump, and I will run out of the number of O1 tasks that I can run. But I come back to it later because it's almost never mission critical for the thing that I'm working on. If I'm developing code, it's something for me, and I don't do that on a paid basis today. It's just, conducting experiments or doing something in my leisure time. And look, if you can get it done with a free AI tool, you probably don't need to pay the $200. And the other challenge here ultimately is that you have to know what to do with it. And I think this is one of the challenges that I've observed with OpenAI's O1 model. A lot of people look at it and they're not impressed by it. Why are they not impressed by it? Well, they're not impressed by it because they don't know what to do with it. It is a different animal. In fact, some of the folks that have been really working on this already understand that the way that you prompt O1 is entirely different than you prompt all of the other models. So that is an important consideration to weigh. And I think it's very important for you to realize, if you're not maxing out your O1 time, this is not for you. Okay. It's just that simple. It really is exactly that simple. So, what does that mean? I mean, we've got professional developers that are doing things, and the people that this is really built for have these very complex tasks that they're trying to perform. They're working on things that they need precise and reliable information for, or they're doing something very sophisticated with math or science computations. It wasn't that long ago that we kind of chuckled about doing math inside of a large language model. I still think it's really a very big waste of compute to ask ChatGPT what's 4 plus 4 and have it do fundamental mathematical computation, because there are better systems for that. And as an engineer, you can combine the systems. I mean, you can offload 4 plus 4 to a math coprocessor and not give that to a large language model. But when we're talking about complex and sophisticated mathematical and scientific computations, these are things that are worthy of handing off to the model. And as you've seen from the mathematical test results, it really does understand that more complex reasoning that's behind the scenes. It's not just simple plus and minus. There's a lot more to it than that. We're talking about complex theorem analysis and very advanced mathematical calculations. So, there are people out there that definitely need this capability. And so who are they, right? They're software developers. I have had some of the most fun I've had learning about AI is watching people that really know how to put this capability to work and seeing how they are working with the models. And more often than not, they're not working exclusively with one model. They're working with a number of different models in a number of different ways. So, in some ways, the downside to something like this is if I'm spending $200 a month to have that most advanced chat GPT subscription, I'm probably only going to use that for a lot of my work because I'm paying so much for that resource. You might be better off splitting your bets and leveraging a combination of different tools. One of the folks that I follow on X actually runs a business, and one of the capabilities that they have built for developers is sort of a controller of sorts, where it actually takes the prompt or the workload that's being handed it and it decides what level of model it wants to allocate that query to. So it's not sending it to O1 every time. In fact, across the mix of things, it might be sending it to a Llama 2 model because it's a very unsophisticated question that just needs a very simple answer. And that's where, we get into kind of these edge cases where it starts to break down, like, where does this really make sense? Because also, if you're a software developer, look, you know how to use APIs, and that then becomes a frustration point, right? And you have to use the interface to take full advantage of it. So there are trade-offs that have to be made. I think you're likely going to be better off not going after O1 unless you know exactly what it is that you want to do it and you have it very clear in your mind what you want to chase. Maybe you're a founder and you have a very specific thing that you want to build. Doing these more advanced, long thinking exercises is definitely a place where it could be applied. And software developers do more than just write code. We talk about generate and debugging code, but the reality is anybody that's a developer understands that writing code is only a very small part of what you do. You're making big architecture decisions. You're understanding how the pieces fit together, and you're working with other people to ensure that the software that you're building is going to add value. And all of those are dimensions that are important to consider. And if you're in science, again, considering these calculations, if you're doing math or scientific research, I think it makes a great deal of sense to be leveraging these tools to augment the work that you're doing so that you can get the best possible results. Data scientists are doing sophisticated work. And honestly, I can tell you, I've been able to lean on these more advanced models for data science things that I would not have attempted before, simply because it does a lot of the work for you. I mean, running a Monte Carlo simulation is not a thing that I did before having these large language models, because it sorted out all of the details and really saved me a ton of time. And then I can actually get useful information and take it somewhere else and solve a bigger problem that I have, rather than having to go and learn how to build all of that myself. And then when you get into, these analytical workflows and building out those capabilities, there's a ton of opportunity to optimize and really take advantage of things. Now, this last one I think is probably the most interesting use case. And this one really got me thinking when I came across this in my research. You know, Legal services are really quite expensive in this country. And also, it is something that we provide free of charge if you are in the legal system. You may have heard the Miranda rights being read to someone as they're being arrested, and part of those Miranda rights include, if you do not have a lawyer, one will be appointed for you. Our legal system requires that legal representation be offered to someone that is being investigated under the law. And of course, the other part of that is innocent until proven guilty. And providing that lawyer service as a part of that process is really vital. And we can have some very sophisticated legal situations where lots of money is being spent. If you've seen the news this week, you may have seen that the judge that was ruling on Elon Musk's compensation for Tesla not only continued to award the person suing him, but also awarded millions of dollars to the winning lawyers in fees, $350 million in legal fees. And that's not just the lawyers being in the courtroom. Obviously, there's a lot of research and investigation, just the legal aid portion of this, where you are looking through all of the existing law and finding those things that apply to your case, or sorting through case files. These are all things that AI is already quite good at. And so being able to push that to the next level with advanced logic and thinking, I think could be really a powerful capability. So that leaves us really with the big question today, which is is anyone actually going to buy this? I mean, who cares? Well, that's kind of interesting. So the first quote I want to share with you now, Andrew Gao is one of the folks that I follow uh, for AI, for his commentary, and I actually think he's pretty much right here. He says he's in the majority, but I think there's going to be quite a number of people that step up and say, yes, I absolutely want this. And he, of course, uses the analogy of, how much money do you make as a software developer? I mean, imagine, if you will, the circumstance where you get hired by a company to be a software developer, and all you do all day is feed ChatGPT to write your code. I mean, if it's good code and you're reviewing it and ensuring that it meets the requirements and submitting that, theoretically, you're adding value simply by leveraging that tool. So if you're making that little bit of money and you're doing less work, I don't know. I think that's kind of a fair question, and there might be some people out there that are actually going to do that. There are people, of course, that want to test this, but I also think that it's a telling question, right? I'm going to get it because I'm going to show it on social media, but what should I test? You know, One of the things I really love about generative AI is, when I have the question, what should I test? I have a place that I can go and start asking that question. Ryder here is talking about how well it's performed for him on business strategy and ideation. I've got some great tools that I get to use. We talked many months ago about OpenAI releasing GPTs. That's not dead. That's actually a growing thing. I'm using multiple different GPTs to get my work done, and some of those things are strategy sessions. Also, if you use these tools to any significant degree, you're going to run into rate limits, and apparently this is gone. So we're not talking about the AT&T and T and Verizon wireless interpretation of unlimited. Apparently, this is really actually unlimited. So that could be an interesting benefit, especially if you're getting stopped out on getting your work done because you hit a rate limit. I mean, and it can make you wait quite a little while. I mean, if you're trying to get something done and it just says, "Hey, you got to hang out for a bit," that could be kind of frustrating. And so, then there's a speculation here that it's going to be more by the time we get to the end of the 12 days of shipments. There's going to be something beyond ChatGPT Pro that's involved here. But on the flip side of that, it's interesting what people decide to ask. Um, and I think that's really telling, right? What are you using this for is ultimately going to be the thing that matters. If you're writing Python, that could be really valuable. What kind of Python are you writing? Are you doing something sophisticated? Yeah, absolutely. I'd certainly would want to have all of my plans stacked up before I launch this and start using it. I don't have any intention of using it for monetary gains, but the other thing that you might consider is, hey, maybe you go buy that $200 subscription, and the first thing you start asking it is, how can I make money with this? I mean, if you can make $200 in a month by using ChatGPT Pro, well, then obviously it's worth it, because if you're making more than that, any dollar over $200 in a month's time frame is an ultimate benefit. And then this last little tidbit that I want to share with you is someone giving us a preview of a 60 Minutes broadcast that has not yet been released. And the speculation here is that because we are seeing them use the video camera, and you can very clearly see on the screen of the iPhone that they are using the advanced voice mode, it's very likely we're going to see that we get a video and advanced voice mode simultaneous. So is that going to be a plus membership, or are they going to require the pro membership? I think it's pretty clear we don't have all of the details yet about exactly how this is going to be used. So that really ultimately brings us back to the question of, what do you think? Is this something that you're excited about? Are you going to be using ChatGPT Pro? Ultimately, the question that I want to bring, that I love to talk about, is the idea of, is this an AI mistake? I think it really depends on your use cases, and that's what we've talked about today. So, unless those of you on the live chat have any questions, which I do want to invite you to share any thoughts that you have during the live broadcast, be happy to have that chat with you as we're going through the conversation. That's why I do these things live. I think I'm going to begin cutting these up a little bit more and publishing them later as full edited videos, just for my own benefit. But look, this isn't the only way you have to communicate with me. Drop by the website. We've got lots of ways to communicate if you don't want to reply here on the video. And also, I've got the newsletter that unfortunately has been on the rack for a little bit of time. I've had some things that have kept me from getting it published, but we're going to get that out here this month for sure. A lot of updates to share, and some really deep thoughts that I've been considering with AI mistakes and where we're going to take things next. So, look, if none of you has anything interesting to share or questions to ask, I want to thank you for watching. I really appreciate you being here. I enjoy spending the time on this. And the investment on my time in these conversations is something that I enjoy. And I want to encourage you, go make some mistakes. Go play with this technology. Figure out where it benefits you and share what you learn, because it's all about community. Let's do this together. I hope you're doing well, and we'll see you next time here on AI Mistakes.